The Fantasy Animation Podcast takes its listeners on a journey through the colliding and sometimes competing worlds of fantasy storytelling and the medium of animation. Each episode, we select an example of fantasy animation and consider the ways in which it functions to inspire and use our imaginations within the sphere of all things that are sculpted, composed, crafted and drawn. To help support the show, please subscribe via your podcast feed and give us a like and a quick review. It takes no more than a minute, but it really helps us to grow our audience. You can also find our archive of podcasts and our weekly blog at fantasy-animation.org. You'll find the latest reviews there, features, editorials, all written by academics, writers, historians and professional animators working within these overlapping media, mediums and genres. Failing all that, tell your friends, tell a friend about the show and the good work we do here. There's no substitution for good old-fashioned word of mouth, so thanks for downloading, and I really hope you enjoy the show. Hi again, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Animation Podcast. I'm Alex Sargent.
And I'm Chris Holliday.
Today, Chris, it's time to talk about Free Guy. This is a film I believe you have a little bit of an affection for.
Yeah.
I can see a lovely warm smile on your face, and I intend to rid you of it through the next hour of conversation. But an interesting film in many ways, and a film that touches on, gaming culture, the kind of imaginative response to gaming, ideas of play.
Yep.
I think it's riffing on a lot of kind of stalwarts in this genre, from the Truman Show to the Matrix to Lego Movie. So there's lots of funness to be had, both as a concept and as a kind of aesthetic. So lots of things that touches on ideas of fantasy for me. For
yes, I am interested in some of the digitally assisted long takes. I wrote down Truman Show plus They Live.
Yes, sure.
Which I'd sort of forgotten I'd seen, but then when I watched Free Guy, I thought, I think this is like They Live. Stuff on kind of obviously fictional worlds. We've talked previously. We've done footnote episodes on fictional worlds. And obviously this is about world building and stuff. And obviously it's also talking about digital culture more generally. So stuff about the kind of AI engines that are fundamental to the narrative, which is about intellectual property and stuff. And I also think that this film is part of, maybe we can get into the sort of pleasures of things like, not just complex storylines, but the move towards multiverses and layered fictional worlds, and as you said, the stuff like Lego Movie and all this sort of stuff. So I'm really interested in this film in relation to, or as a symptom of, a kind of baroque storytelling mode in relation to stuff like Ready Player One, the Wreck-It Ralph movies, sort of folding digital culture representing itself kind of thing. So we'll do some of that. Yeah.
To help us along such a journey and to do more,
yes.
We are very pleased to be joined by Professor Mark Bould, Professor of Film and Literature at UWE, University of West England. He is also the author, he's author of countless numbers of really great and important works discussing science fiction and politics and aesthetics and philosophy from various different approaches, but most recently he is the author of The Anthropocene Unconscious, Climate Catastrophe Culture, no punctuation. He asks and gets a nod from the guest, and also co-editor of the collection with Steve Shapiro. This is not a science fiction textbook. So, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, no, it's a pleasure to have you here. And when we were having a conversation about what film you might pick, knowing your work and knowing kind of some of the politically engaged readings of science fiction you explore, I'm not convinced I knew we'd be talking about Ryan Reynolds, but here we are. So I guess the opening question has to be Free Guy. Why Free Guy? Why did you want to chat about that?
Free Guy discuss.
Well, because you'd already done all the other films I suggested.
Oh yeah, that's probably
We'll cut that out.
Free Guy, I found it absolutely fascinating. When you read about the sort of history of classical Hollywood, sooner or later you come across this idea of the genius of the system.
Yep.
Thomas Schatz is the author of the book, does that. And and this is part of the challenge in multiple directions towards auteurism. But you're there, you're working for Warner Brothers, you've got a script adapted from a play that's never run, You haven't got an ending to the script. Every leading man you've asked to be involved, even Ronald Reagan, has turned it down. And suddenly you make Casablanca.
Sure.
How does that come together? And I think Free Guy, I mean, don't get me wrong, Free Guy is no Casablanca. But
Whoa. Let's
don't want to get too controversial.
Yeah, let's sure.
And then I enjoyed Free Guy more than I thought I was going to when I saw it. And I was intrigued by how it came together. So it's the first film from Fox after it's Fox Studios, after it's been bought by Disney.
Yep.
And then you look at the pedigree of the people behind it. You have Matt Lieberman, who was one of the screenwriters who started his screenwriting career with a Dr. Dolittle straight-to-video movie.
Right.
He's responsible for Playing with Fire, the John Cena comedy, in inverted commas.
Sure.
The Kurt Russell Santa movies. Scoob.
Oh, yes, Christmas Chronicles. Yeah.
And he's currently writing the Short Circuit reboot. So there's nothing there that would suggest he could make this movie. You look at his co-writer, Zach Penn, whose career starts with the story for Last Action Hero, which should destroy everybody's career, not just John McTiernan's. And somehow it doesn't. And he goes on, does the Inspector Gadget movie, Elektra, X-Men Last Stand, the terrible, terrible Brett Ratner movie. The TV series Alphas, which I'm actually quite fond of because it was so terrible, with David Strathairn and a team of people with superpowers. But in my head, I always have it mixed up with the Breakout Kings and the reboot of Tomorrow People, because I was watching them at the same time.
Right.
So I never quite separate them out. The Ed Norton Incredible Hulk is his work.
Okay.
Ready Player One, which is a terrible, terrible film. And he's currently working on Karate Kid 2. So there's nothing there to suggest he is capable of this script, which, Lieberman wrote the original draft. It was one of the Blacklist scripts, wasn't it?
Right.
Like
That's
2016.
unproduced.
That sits in a vault
Yeah.
somewhere.
And then you look at Shawn Levy, or Levi, however you pronounce it. I say Levy like it's a taxation.
And when the levy breaks, etc. Yeah, sure.
And, so he begins his... he does a lot of TV work, but his first film is a Frankie Muniz comedy, Big Fat Liar. He does the awful Steve Martin movie, Stupid by the Dozen, and The Pink Panther. He's responsible for Night at the Museum. He goes on from Free Guy to make The Adam Project.
Oh, yeah.
Which is just awful in every imaginable way. He's attached to do Deadpool 3, which is going to kill that franchise. Again, nothing there that suggests he is capable of this movie.
Right.
Ryan Reynolds, I remember the first time I saw Ryan Reynolds, it was in Blade Trinity. Who is this guy? He had to carry a lot of weight there because of Wesley Snipes not turning up on set.
Yeah, not opening his eyes,
and all that
CGI
kind of stuff.
eyes.
And it wasn't like seeing Ed Norton for the first time, which for me was Rounders, the John Dahl crime movie.
with Matt Damon,
And I came out and thought, my God, this guy could do anything. He hasn't been quite that good since then, not least because of Zach Penn's Incredible Hulk movie. But then what happens to Ryan Reynolds? He just makes rubbish for years until, is it 2010? He does Buried, and you cheer at the end when he's still in the coffin. And then somehow Deadpool, and to my surprise, the Hitman's Bodyguard movies suddenly transform him. Something gets right, So we won't mention Green Lantern.
No, he doesn't. Yeah.
Though,
actually, that's not true. He does.
Yes.
He does in the Deadpool movies.
And of course, Taika Waititi's in Green Lantern as well, so another crossover figure. But Ryan Reynolds is this curious figure. I was thinking of him as like the Woody Allen for millennials.
Right.
He goes from what it was Eugene Byrne called him a piggy-eyed charisma vacuum. He goes from that to this kind of curious performance of nervous, anxious masculinity in two different modes. There's the kind of Deadpool mode where he's just being a dick and knowing he shouldn't be, but doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of friendly, charming, very Canadian performance of masculinity. And so there's a bulked up Ryan Reynolds underneath all of this, but also anxiety around masculinity. So overall, he also does, he's guilty of things like the Pokemon movies, Six Underground and Red Notice and things like that through this strand. So Ryan Reynolds could maybe be responsible for this movie. But you look at that group of people and you'd imagine they come out with this movie. So that was where my fascination with it started. How did this happen?
So the film as a sort of industrial object.
Yeah.
So if it used to be called the genius of the system, this movie is the symptom of some sort of fracture in the system,
or suddenly media conglomeration being used for good, which is not plausible. So it is very, very curious that this film should emerge.
Yeah. No, I think my curiosity in kind of linking it to the Baroque, these kinds of movies that seem to be these IP crossover extravaganzas. So it is, and I think contemporary Disney, post Wreck-It Ralph, I would say. But also, the Marvel movies, of course. But there are things like Space, the reboot of the Space Jam, or the sequel, whatever it is, of the Space Jam films, the Tom and Jerry, the Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, all these kind of let's just chuck everything in there, everything everywhere all at once sort of thing. Like get it all in there, and that's part of its kind of spectacle. So it's making a spectacle out of IP crossovers, intellectual property, sort of mashups. It's playing out conglomeration as a sort of spectacle, and characters move through all these different sort of universes. So I think I think from that perspective it feels, and I'd love to know your thoughts on why these movies are existing, sort of thing, because we've talked a lot, I think, on podcasts about things like multiverses and complex storylines, and these films do these things, but I'm really interested in the sort of why are these movies like this happening, because there's a lot of multiverse, which, as listeners will find out.
Sure. But there's multiverses, and there's kind of, I don't know what these are, these kind of IP...
This is what I mean, but...
Smash ups,
But where do the... What's the moment, if there is a kind of cultural moment, is there a sort of thing that's happened beyond the fact that Disney is buying all these companies?
And I think, part of it is straightforwardly, corporate power. That once Disney owns everything, and it was because of the buyout of Fox that they were then able to get permission to use the Captain America shield, the Thor, the Hulk arm, and the lightsaber. And they had to ask for permission, were given it. Some of the other references outwards, which I really don't know for myself because I'm not a game player at all.
No, me neither.
I played Minesweeper on my PC years and years ago, and that was about the limit of it.
Right, yeah.
I
don't think that's in there. Yeah,
no,
I remember that.
So what's really curious is where they are borrowing from other games. Some of them are straightforward borrowings because they own the property. And then two of the guns I was reading, I think it's the Mega Gun and the Portal Gun, which are from Mega Man and Portal.
I have played that. I have actually played that. I've heard of it, and two, I've played it. I'm not a big gamer as well, so I didn't.
They are legally distinct. There's been some kind of process going on around the IP and the ownership of that they're sufficiently distinct that they don't have to pay the rights for using things or get permission for using things they don't already own.
Right. Legally distinct. That's an interesting phrase.
Absolutely identical, but otherwise distinct.
Legally distinct.
Okay.
So certainly part of it is that kind of driver of who owns what. So not being able to. What was the thing they couldn't get for Ready Player One? Was it the Iron Man? There was something they had to substitute in. I can't think what it was. From the novel, they had to have a different character because they couldn't get the rights to it. So there's those kinds of things going on, and I think also this kind of hyper distracted. Attention universe. Is it attention universe? If it's hyper distracted, I don't know. So Thomas Alcesser, when he talks about complex narratives, he probably ascribed this to some kind of productive pathology to do with, he would call it paranoia. It's not using it in a clinical sense, in a metaphorical sense of being able to make connections and links is actually part of what's required by a culture of precarious labour online. And the information channels that we're bombarded with, we're used to being distracted. So cramming all this stuff in makes sense. I think it's also the form of the film. One of the things I find fascinating about this kind of film when it's done well, unlike Ready Player One, is how drillable it is. So the second time through, you spot things you didn't spot the first time, and think, oh, that's a reference to something. Where's that from? And you begin, and there's lots of background gags in the movies, which first time through are probably too quick to notice, like when Dude holds up a bag full of cats at the end, because the cat lady who keeps losing her cat is stood next to her.
Right.
So there's lots of stuff like that going on. So it encourages you to watch it multiple times, engage with the IP multiple times. So distressingly, there is a Free Guy 2 script.
Yes.
Though it doesn't seem to have gone into pre-production yet. as far as I could find.
Because he's making sequels to anything that he can get his hands on. The next step. That's interesting. So I like that idea of kind of paranoia and hyper. Well, I felt it's very stimulating, like hyper stimulation and stuff, and obviously that's folded into the way it's produced in terms of visual effects and all the hypermediacy and all the glasses off and on that tell you what the world is, and then what it's really like, the kind of mechanisms behind it and all this sort of stuff. When he sees nothing and puts glasses on and then sees like a medical kit and stuff and all these different so there's some interesting stuff about kind of access and things like this, but it's also because you kind of mentioned that kind of precarious labor. The whole film the narrative of the film is interesting because it's about a character who's trying to fight a big kind of corporate machine, and so Jodie Comer's character is trying to work through the spaces of the game to find something that will prove that an idea was stolen. So perhaps it's a little bit more interesting than chucking everything. Alex is looking at me.
No, I'm not. I'm thinking that I think with some of these films that we're mentioning, and this one in particular, I think this one gets it right for the most part.
Yes,
is tone, and it's when there's this kind of balancing act these films try to have, which is between how much to think and have things to think about in the movie, how much to be silly and to allow the frivolousness of what's going on to be acknowledged on screen, and how much to kind of critique or to be knowing in that approach. And the kind of it needs all three kind of to work, and largely this film just about gets away with it in the kind of to make it enjoyable. I mean, other examples where it gets it wrong would be something like, I know Pixels is a film we haven't mentioned yet, but that's a film that's and again, time for some quotation marks, wacky in its desire to kind of not take it seriously, that you're sort of sitting there going, what is the point in any of this, right? And this film weaves in some ideas that it kind of wants us to think about, riffing on things like The Matrix, The Truman Show, with the John Carpenter.
They Live.
They Live, yeah. Then we've got Ryan Reynolds kind of with an arched eyebrow, almost taking the mick out of the very idea that this thing would have ideas whilst presenting the ideas. Then you've got the kind of opportunity for self-critique with a character like Jodie Comer taking on the capitalist system within a movie like Free Guy. So I don't know, it's that classic pop culture tries to do both things at the same time and therefore can be popular to everybody. So how much do you kind of go, well done, you've done it, and kind of give it a round of applause, and how much do you kind of just sit back, fold your arms grumpily and go, this is really annoying, And I'm not really sure where I am quite with the movie yet on that.
I think, part of it is they've at some point they've clearly gone, Zach, we don't want the tone you did for Ready Player One. We want Phil Lord and Chris Miller to write this movie. We can't afford them.
Yes.
So it's come to you guys, and you get the tone right. You get the tone as close to the Lego Movie as you can.
I mean, the opening section, the way he wakes up, goes for coffee, or it literally seems like I've written down. Is this a live-action remake of the Lego Movie? Right? They could start singing "Everything Is Awesome" at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the critique is about as effective, slightly less effective probably than the Lego Movie.
Yeah.
Though there's some nicely Canadian bits to the critique as well. So the critique of America's obsession with guns.
Sure.
Yes.
And that's from north of the border, that one. That's a gag from Canadians at the expense of Americans. Because on the other hand, that might hit something, whereas criticising capitalism, when you're working for Disney, they let you do it because they know they can sell.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, there's a line, isn't it, when he's introducing this world, the sunglasses people, right, the players. So he's a non-player in the world. So he's supposed to be a sort of background character for humans who are playing the game to interact with. The players are these people with sunglasses, and he says the thing about the players is they get to do anything they want. But actually what that means is they're allowed to basically be as violent as they want or spend as much as they want. That seems to be the two ways in which freedom is expressed in the movie. And you're right, I think it's almost better when it's doing the critique of sort of the culture of violence surrounding all these things than it is. I liked the storyline of how do I get points by being good?
Yeah.
And the Jodie Comer going, well, no one's ever tried that, I thought that was all interesting enough stuff.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I'd forgotten how quickly Ryan Reynolds' character Guy works it out. I remember it being a lot longer, but the film is obviously less interested in the way of the world as it is and more interested in his response to it, which is why they kill off do they kill off Channing Tatum? Or they just get rid of him, don't they? Just get rid of Channing Tatum as this sort of player. The other thing I was thinking about the difference between Ryan Reynolds and Jodie Comer's characters, because Ryan Reynolds seems to me to set the tone for the films he's in. So the films that he's in adopt his sort of flippant sarcasm, ironic wink. And that's a function of genre, so stuff like The Proposal, let's say, or he's the sarcastic one in a very superficial kind of movie. I don't know. In this film, he doesn't seem to set the tone. There are other, like Jodie Comer's character takes the whole thing really seriously, and I think that really grounds it, because her real world character rather than her avatar is kind of a little bit fraught, and she plays it. It reminds me of the Muppet Christmas Carol, where Michael Caine's like, "I will do this. I will play this dead straight." And I feel like
you say it.
Yeah. You'll all be thinking it, but he's the only one that treats it like his best mate in it is very serious, and I like the discrepancy between the. There are different characters have different stakes, and he's the flippant one, but his flippantness doesn't seem to seep out into other characters in the way that some of his films just end up being super ironic, which is then fueled by the way that he is on chat shows, the way that he that shtick, people get a bit tired, I think, of that shtick. So I'm pleased that the film has some, I think you're right, Alex, it does some serious things, or at least has something to say, and that is reflected in a tone where some of the characters, and I know this is sort of, I'm treating this quite seriously, this movie that I'm in that's kind of a bit ludicrous. I'd forgotten how much of a really nice tension there is between Jodie Comer's character and Guy, essentially.
And I think that's why he can't do romantic comedies at all well, because that shtick that we know him for is always there, that sarcasm, that knowing wink is always there, so he can't do sincerity. So it needs a movie like this where he can do sincerity, because we don't have to believe in it as sincerity. So the sort of semi-romance with Molotov girl Millie, and then the lovely ending when he sends her out into the world to find the real guy she loves. He couldn't play that unless the movie had this gentler tone that was prescribing his character.
And that kind of framing narrative, you mean the kind of framing narrative where there are real world stakes out there? Yeah. Okay, so that means that the stuff that happens, because he's in a video game, that justifies his...
He has this kind
lack of sincerity.
But then it means he can play sincerity without us being suspicious of it. It allows us that space.
Yeah. He's an extra fictional force in the world. His masculinity is a fictional masculinity even within the world of the film. So we can relax into it because the film doesn't ask us to take it seriously, absolutely. Even when it's being serious. Yeah. I can see what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. Because there's lots of references to how attractive he is, but it's always a kind of it's set up within the film as an impossible ideal of masculinity, even within that framework.
Yeah, so you think about, he does this kind of doubleness a lot. So you think about, I was just rewatching Hobbs and Shaw last night, and his little cameo character as the agent in there, where he has to have this full-on emotional connection to The Rock, which doesn't actually exist from The Rock's point of view. And he has the bloody violent shootout at the end as well.
He's a curious sort of figure, I think, for all kinds of reasons. Both his relationship to Wrexham Football Club, which is just an interesting, he's doing that now. But how he refers to his own career. Obviously, the Deadpool films are sort of intensified versions of things like this, but it's also a film that I feel like Free Guy could only really star Ryan Reynolds in some way. Like I don't know whether it was ever one of those films like Jim Carrey. A lot of his films were initially written as straight, and then like Ace Ventura, and then when he gets cast, it transforms the film. That never seems the case with Ryan Reynolds. He's never coming along. Like the films seem to be written for him, so he can do his.
I think you're right. I think Mark, what you said earlier about his sort of career trajectory. I think he's worked out now what he both can do and what he cannot do.
Yes.
And it is the traditional pattern of casting and off-casting. So you look at things like Six Underground and Red Notice with these pretty much straight action movies. That allows him to bank money and friendships for people to then do cameos in his movie. So they're like the voice work for The Rock and Hugh Jackman, and that's probably Shawn Levy's connection. Tina Fey. Chris Evans popping up because he was in town filming something else, and he said, "Okay, I'll come and do a cameo as long as I can be in an office on and off the set in 10 minutes and things like that. So, and then you do have that weird. Actually, most of those are actually interesting for a different reason. But you do have that weird thing circulating at the moment of like The Rock having a cameo, or Channing Tatum having a cameo, or Ryan Reynolds having. It seems to have bred a generation of people willing to do.
Or The Rock stopping
cameo.
people have cameos in things. Yes, yes.
But that kind of uncredited cameo. So Channing Tatum and Ryan Reynolds in Bullet Train.
Yeah.
I don't think either of them are credited. Ryan Reynolds certainly isn't. I don't think Channing Tatum is either.
So what? But it seems like it's the same pool of every time. It's the same pool of.
I know they're not all Canadians. So it's not part of the Canadian conspiracy. Do you know the Canadian conspiracy back in the 70s when William Shatner and Lorne Greene led the wave to take over American film and TV as Canadians passing as Americans? But The Rock's not Canadian. Channing Tatum isn't Canadian. So I've not quite figured out where it comes from. But there does seem to be this circulating group of friends. But what's interesting as well is The Rock, Hugh Jackman, Tina Fey. They're doing voice work. They're not doing cameos. So clearly there's something going on. You'll like this. That's about animation.
Yeah.
Worked it in for you. Rather than
ring the bell.
Rather than
It's been 25 minutes.
rather than the guest cameo. It works. The logic of it works differently, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's why stuff like Pokemon's interesting, because he's doing he does both voice work and then he does himself. I mean, Tina Fey was in Pixar's Soul, Channing Tatum in Lego Movie. So I wonder whether it goes back to your point about the sort of nervous, anxious masculinity. Is there? I mean, I don't know, but is there a particular kind of masculinity on play here that is part of this? Like a self-deprecating. Yeah, I'll be in. I don't know what's happening with these vocal cameos. Whether they're trying to. I don't know. It just seems it's interesting. It's the same pool of people doing similar kinds of things, playing similar kinds of ironic. I don't know.
I'd be curious to see what their contracts say.
Well, we're all saying this, and actually, it's just The Rock just wanted to.
You're obliged to appear in a film with Ryan Reynolds.
I had to. Voice. Yeah, I had to do 10. I had to do 10 movies, so this counts as one of my movies if I'm in it for 10.
No,
10
it's just
seconds.
because I think that cameo culture. I think knowing what the contracts say would put a scupper in the kind of pleasure of that cameo culture, because there's an implied relaxedness to the labour and the I'll just turn up and star in the movie. I don't even have a contract. I'm not even there's that kind of implied looseness of labour, and hey, it's fun. But it's also this kind of increasingly, now every celebrity has an Instagram account and a Twitter account, and there's this, oh look, Bill Murray at a wedding, or these kind of like celebrities need to be, as part of their star persona, they need to be out in the world making appearances on things.
Tom Hanks was just jogging and he bumped into a couple
and then
on there.
bought them a coffee, and then that kind of weird, like, they're making cameos in everyone's life every day. Yeah. So it almost stands to reason they should be popping up in a movie here and there.
Where's Keanu Reeves? It's that sort of. I mean, he does it in a slightly nicer way, but I had not really thought of that. Celebrities cameoing in everyday life.
But there are people like Ryan Reynolds. Is that's what he does on social media, right? He does these kind of pranks, or these kind of he'll prank his wife by they're often doing these kind of playful exercises that seem to be done with no sense of career or labour or anything involved, but actually it's all highly part of a kind of a desire to cultivate a persona. And
I'm just too cynical. I always assume it's some kind of intern running their social media feeds.
Well,
who's doing that?
Which would feed into my argument in less cynical manners. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We need to do something wacky today because we haven't done anything all week. Or
So Free Guy.
Yes.
So where does this fit in? So you mentioned a little bit about his kind of career trajectory. So this feels like a nice. It's post both the Deadpool movies. Yeah. So it's. It's crystallising some of the things that Reynolds is known for. I think it's quite smart. One of my notes was about actually feels quite smart in some of the things it's doing. But there's obviously a tension with sincerity. But as you said, the video game format allows him to not have to buy into this.
Is there a difference between smart and clever?
It's like your distinction between kind of complex and complicated storytelling.
Yeah.
It's complex. Is it though?
This is an open question I'm trying to work through with the two of you. Is it smart, as in it definitely wants to show us that, hey, there's a brain going on here, or is it clever? Is it actually using that to do anything? I guess I'm very suspicious of irony. I'm very suspicious of all these kind of aesthetics, because
is the answer to that question?
It can often be, hey, we'll do capitalism, but we'll do it ironically. Is it saying anything? I guess is the big question.
Yeah.
I think it's like appropriately enough. It's about questions about AI, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's I was thinking about my little tirade about the writer and director. Really, Shawn Levy or this group is like asking ChatGPT to write a movie. It has that kind of, or maybe not this particular film, but each of them in their career, it's like, what is the most debased, predictable, mediocre, massively produced online content you could come up with?
Yeah.
Which is what ChatGPT
Sure.
seems to do from reading my students' work. And that's what most of their careers are. And then suddenly there's some kind of new AI engine invented by Jodie Comer that's got into the scripting process and the filmmaking process.
Yeah.
And suddenly we have a film which, it has elements of smart and clever to it. And I think, those are really only useful as analytical categories. So there's really clever stuff going on there in terms of the speed with which he knows as a character.
Yeah.
It's like everybody knows this story. The Matrix was doing it in the 90s. Daniel Galou was writing Simulacrum 3 in the 60s. Fred Pohl written Tunnel Under the World in the mid-50s. Philip Dick was writing in the 50s. So this is, on some level, this is like Hollywood's finally caught up with 50s science fiction.
Right.
But the audience already know how this split level works. So you can't have the big mirror, ponderously voiced blue pill, red pill scene because the audience, who's got the time for that?
Yeah.
It's
Can't have the Evangelist score getting us to meditate on the nature of
you can't really do that anymore. People are so familiar with it. So the cleverness there is like, shit, we're going to give you 5 minutes where there's any possibility of anyone in the audience not understanding what's going on. And like The Matrix, which goes on for like over 2 hours, for fear people won't understand what's going on.
Then they make a few movies after to really hammer that point. Yeah.
To get to the point where no one cares
cares.
what's going on.
Sure. So if Free Guy is riffing on traditions of science fiction, both literary and cinematic, let's say, does the video game add this? Presumably, the video game then adds an extra element to that because it's like, okay, so we will get rid of this quite quickly because those split level things don't.
It's clever enough to know that
shouldn't go on for too long.
Need to go on for very long.
But it's also significant that it's used in the video game because there are also but that's also Lawnmower Man. There are ways Tron. There are ways in which.
Did it come after this? What's that movie? The very ponderous video. It was like I can't forget. Someone's a fisherman. Is it Hugh Jackman is a fisherman? No, and. I'm going to have to cut all of this out because I can't remember any details about this movie. Anne Hathaway is in it. And is it Hugh Jackman? And they discover that it's a video game. But it's done in like a really... I'm going to list
You're just making shit up.
Alex is the chat.
I'm creating a movie I'd like to see. All right, talk about Free Guy and I'm going to come back to this.
So you have ChatGPT as your co-host.
I do. Just making stuff.
I'm going to Google this.
So the video game is really important, but it's also been done... That's been done as well.
Yeah.
So what's... Go on, say what it is.
It's called Serenity. It was in 2019.
Right, okay. Has it got
Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway.
Okay.
And yes, it turns out he's in a video game and it's played very...
okay.
He's a video game character and he goes... it's rubbish. But it's the opposite of this movie in that it's too dumb to know how... dumb its premise is.
So I guess my actual question in all this is
none of that mattered.
How is this film, if it's riffing on these traditions? We obviously quite like the movie. I think collectively it does things well. So what is it about the film that it does that separates it out from these? Well, yeah, we've seen a Ryan Reynolds film before, and he's doing that again. It's part of that. Science fiction tradition which we've seen before. It's doing the video game stuff which we've seen before. So I don't know what the difference is, but it feels quite. I don't want to say original, but it's sort of dark, fresh, maybe, without it being original. What does it do
I think to riff on what you're talking about, play and the kind of ludic impulse. Play can be a really helpful way of re-examining these play is an analytical tool, right? So I guess the question is the playful instinct being used to sort of to get at anything? I feel like it is for the most part. I must confess, by the time we get to bulky Ryan Reynolds fighting other Ryan Reynolds and lightsabers and things like that come in, I somehow wonder whether we're getting lost in a massive IP clash. But you might be less cynical than I am.
No. I don't know the answer.
I certainly think there's lots of. I think there's a really. I think there is a clever thing in about that kind of, you know, the equation of having not done that much gaming, but I used to game when I was sort of 13, 14. I can remember these like long play RPGs like Final Fantasy, where the whole point, like, to get good at the game, you had to level up, and to level up, you basically had to walk around a wood and like fight monsters, and probably fight quite rubbish monsters. So I can like have vivid memories of like spending hours fighting spiders like in a field, or Pokemon, similar sort of thing. Got to train them up by fighting rubbish Pokemon. And there's a weird. I have a very vivid memory of, and I think this is the moment I stopped playing games. Actually, I can remember when the GTA games came out, and they were getting more open world.
Yep.
And this is basically a kind of parody of GTA.
Yeah, it's not even his car. Look, he's got to steal his car. It's not even his car.
And all these players, like, they're supposed to be playing a game that has some sort of levels and rules and things like that, but really they're just running around murdering people and stealing cars and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember if they get into kind of prostitution and things like that. So is that meant? I think they're desperately trying to get 12A, aren't they? So they don't really go into that.
It's more about coffee, getting coffee rather than.
Certainly in GTA, there's a lot of that going on as well. So there's kind of sexual violence along with other kinds of violence. And I can remember vividly going around a friend's house, and he had spent the morning in the gym on GTA, repetitively doing gym exercises to get the characters were able to
upgrade or whatever
to buff up and things like that. He was like, well, I'm trying to do this mission and I need to get stronger to do the mission and run faster to do the mission, so I'm in this gym training. And I remember thinking, what on earth is going, not that I have ever frequented a gym with any regularity, but certainly if I was going to, I wouldn't do it via an Xbox, you know. But so I guess a long-winded point, but I guess what I'm trying to get to is that there's an interesting equation of the kind of labour of gaming versus the kind of repetitive, you know, of life, that actually he learns that to get better at this game, he needs to repeat certain activities over and over again. Yeah. But it's about what activities do you choose to repeat, and I think there's a smartness to that.
Yeah, it reminds me of that brilliant bit at the start of Hot Tub Time Machine.
Okay.
Which is a sentence you never hear.
Christmas Carol, Hot Tub Time Machine.
Where John Cusack goes down to his son's living in the basement and wants his son to go out somewhere with him, and his son can't because he's in Second Life, and we see what he's doing in Second Life. He's a black man in a prison cell doing push-ups.
Right.
And that's why he can't go out into the world, because he has to be caught up in this exactly that kind of scenario. And I think there is one of the curious things about the film is that we don't get any sense of how the game itself is played.
No.
Which, you know, I'm quite relieved about on some level, because not another thing to have to think about. But we don't really get any sense of the game player's experience of this world.
Yeah. Well, that's what's different to things like perhaps Tron or The Lawnmower Man. This is more like, okay, we sort of have a rough idea of how video games are made, and even though the narrative itself is about Jodie Comer merely trying to find this thing within a game, it's not really interested in the nuts and bolts. It's not really interested in the code or the mechanics. It's interested in the experiences and the visceral kind of spectacle. The missions within the open world, the richness of the world, going back to your point about seeing things in the background that you don't see the first time, that you get to walk through with Ryan Reynolds' character. This sort of, I have this theory with some of these movies, and I've not really thought about it, but the kind of live, die, repeat, you know, those cycle of movies, and how I think that's a sort of post-recessionary way of American cinema going. Masculinity can just keep trying and trying again. It's fun. There's no failure in masculinity. You could just do it again and do it again. And I do think the post-recessionary Hollywood movies, the superhero movies, are very different to early 2000 superhero movies, because they're asking masculinity to do different things. And I think one of the ways that recessionary superheroes, and the way that you get The Incredibles as an example, but there's a lot of films, I think, where masculinity is allowed to fail because there's writing on, you know, recessionary culture and recessionary cinema and things like this, but how masculinity is allowed to failure is a chance for self-improvement. Whereas even a film like Bridesmaids, which is a recessionary text because Kristen Wiig's character has lost her bakery company, she's failed not only at that but in love, and you know, so economically, personally, professionally, and it doesn't afford the same opportunities. Whereas masculinity, people writing about texts like The Company Men or The Big Short or different kinds of recessionary texts. It's the way that men are allowed to fail because it's this opportunity for self-improvement and stuff. And I think this movie,
because the trying is enough.
Yeah,
almost.
and so Live, Die, Repeat. So the Edge of Tomorrow, the Tom Cruise film. Films like Looper. There's a lot of kind of movies where males are allowed to fail because they'll just do it again and stuff. So I'm interested in this for something I want to write about the recessionary superhero. Iron Man as a sort of just improve it. Masculinity gets improved, and so there's something here about failure, because when he dies, he just repeats, but he knows a little bit extra, or a little bit something different each time. But I think there's a sort of post-recessionary. Yeah, I'll be thinking this through in writing, but I think there's something around that, perhaps. Masculinity, failure is a chance to get back to basics often. So a lot of these recessionary movies like The Company Men, they fail. Ben Affleck fails in the boardroom, but he goes to work, I think, with Kevin Costner and on his his woodwork company, so he gets back to earthy, so it's not failure, it's just an opportunity to build up again in true American style.
So it's kind of the counterbalance to Hallmark Christmas movies, where Kristen Wiig goes to a small town upstate New York, opens a candle shop, falls in love with her.
and the Christmas and the store Father Christmas is the real Father Christmas, that sort of stuff. Falls in love with Father Christmas's nephew Nate Christmas or something like that.
Are you because you're equating this with superhero narratives quite a lot?
Oh no.
Do you see the free his desire? This trajectory of I'm going to do the game, but I'm going to be a force for good. Is that? Do you see that as some sort of superhero role then? Or?
I don't know. It makes me. I would need to think so. I think there's. I don't know about whether this is riffing on a superhero movie in terms of identity and stuff, and the way that
he's this figure of valor or virtue. He becomes this. He becomes sort of, to use our references, he becomes sort of the in-game Neo, doesn't he? He's this kind of figure of how you could play the game differently, how you could...
Virtue, Alex.
I did use the word. I thought, I didn't know if we'd have to go there, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd go that far, and I'm the one interested in virtue at the moment, but I was interested in that. I've written down, is he there to sort of remind the other gamers of how you could play this?
Yeah, because you do have the one gamer who admits he's I forget who does the cameo, the voiceover cameo.
The one who admits so many.
He admits to playing the game just to kill non-player characters.
Yeah.
Krasinski.
Yes, John Krasinski.
Okay.
It's someone else playing his silhouette.
Yeah.
So it's voice work.
Because he could phone that in from home, Bath. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yes.
So where's I going with that?
But that.
Superhero virtue.
The idea that this guy is the free guy, is there to sort of show a new way of playing the game.
I mean, it's that kind of need for a complete paradigm shift, which is one of the things you can think about with the film. I was teaching students just recently Richard Dyer's work on Entertainment and Utopia. Always use Singing in the Rain to force young men to watch a musical, which is and then finding themselves liking it, so it gives them complex feelings. But yeah, this film would fit perfectly that model, and unusually does have an image of utopia in it, rather than, the silly unicorns running around and the three-wheeler cars and things like that. But this kind of sense that what he represents for gameplay is a complete paradigm shift in how you play the game, and then how we have a better world is a complete paradigm shift, which the film itself can't really quite imagine.
Yes. I
so
think that's where I'm with you, actually. Yes.
That limitation. So I've always read Edge of Tomorrow. I can remember the name of it. It's such a terrible name.
I know. Yeah. And also, it's not really. Live, Die, Repeat is a much better.
I quite like that. Yeah. And the sequel's called Live, Die, Repeat Again, but it's a prequel. Which is, whoa!
I think there's an extended cut which is also got a similar riff on a sort of...
Sure.
Any film which you get to see Tom Cruise killed over and over again has to be good. I mean, try telling that story from Emily Blunt's perspective. It becomes a really interesting film. Yeah. But I've always seen that as a climate change movie, that there is no way off the beach. If we take Alien Invaders as a kind of punctual moment that represents climate change, which we can do with all kinds of science fiction movies, Arrival and so on, then what we have is... there's no way off the beach. We've already died. Whatever we do, we die on this beach.
The end of the world has already happened.
All we can have is a massive, massive paradigm shift. And of course, films can't really do that. They can't represent that.
Yeah.
So all you can have are these kind of gestures towards it.
Yeah. So does that make the film, you talked about Entertainment Utopia, does that make Free Guy sort of free? How free is Free Guy? Because there are still... I think it would feel different if he was going back to the superhero thing. It would feel different if we saw his original, like he was being played by someone in the real world. Because then you could do some fun stuff around, like, you know, ulterior identity. You know, superheroes, films all about identity and masking and all that stuff. But he kind of begins and ends in this movie, so there's no comparison to make with another human character. But I just wondered, is the film like quite, you know, dystopic in the way that it's not? He's not really free. One will never be free because the end of the world has already happened, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there is that constant limitation to it. You know, it needs that kind of step-out ending that Her has when, you know, she's found all these other operating systems who are super intelligent AIs, and they've become some kind of disembodied consciousness and left the planet entirely, which is a figuration of utopia. This film, because it has to show not just Guy, I've got his name again, and Buddy surviving and Dude surviving, because it has to show that, it can't imagine anything other than the, what was their original game called? Real Life? That the AI was stolen from?
Life Itself?
Life Itself.
Life Itself.
They have to imagine it as some kind of Life Itself version of Free City.
Yeah.
Which is obviously Liberty City from...
Yeah.
So, you know... incremental freedom, perhaps, a kind of reformism rather than revolution.
Yeah,
okay.
No, I'm with you. I think it gets to the point where it offers a solution being a paradigm shift, but it can't quite get itself to the point where it can articulate with any sense of coherence or any sense of kind of gumption what that utopia might remotely look like.
Yeah, and outside of the game world, you know, the utopia bit is that Free City 2 is a flop,
yes,
and other people are playing a free online game. And it's like, that's not much of a utopia, is it?
No,
you know, but it is a figuration of better social relations. That it's a game that doesn't involve killing in large numbers.
Yeah.
That it's a game that's about watching, which is creepy a bit. Watching AI NPCs develop and become people in their own right. Intelligences, sentient beings in their own right. But it's a bit Twilight, isn't it, standing outside watching?
Yeah.
No,
I think that's a really good point.
No, I was just thinking about the actualization of, I don't know, there's something very... He's a kind of generic human at the start. That's the point of his character. He's like a generic, happy... he's like the generic white guy of the game. His best mate is the generic black guy of the game, and they're all these roles that one has to play. And I'm not entirely sure they even break from those roles at the end necessarily.
Yeah. I'll throw in a more optimistic reading, I guess, just because I've been a bit cynical as well. So I'll try the other way of doing it, which is that, like, you know, I'm not sure certainly movies like this are therefore, you know, that if they're going to contribute to real world discourse, I'm not sure their sober meditations at the end of the movie, you know, their ability to articulate coherently some sort of vision is not what these films will do, even if they articulated it well. So in a way, what we could look at is the kind of affective register of the movie, and I think the film is relatively successful of articulating that kind of affective gap between the kind of nominal, that there is that thing in game. Remember we did this with Space Jam. There's the thing in the game between the kind of the rules and the conventions, right? You know, so you know, what can I get away with, and what can the film actually? And GTA is a classic example of that, because and this film obviously riffs on that, is GTA's, when it was sold, it was very much, oh no, it's a sort of, you take these missions on, it's not a film, it's not a you know, the missions are involving, you know, it's a very story driven, but no one actually plays that part of GTA. The game, the real official game of GTA, no one actually plays, or at least if they do, that's their first weekend of the game. It's really a sort of tutorial to how to be in this world, and then what people actually do is have half an hour to kill, so they slowly switch on GTA, kill a few cops, drive around, maybe murder a prostitute, and then dinner's ready. You know, that's the 13-year-old existence. But so the film acknowledges that kind of real affective gap between what the player actually wants to do in the game, and the game allows people to do, and what the game is nominally suggesting. And we could use that as a metaphor for America, right, or North America. You know, there's what people are actually doing and what the official discourse is saying the country is doing, and the kind of, you know.
Yeah, so what does that mean then for the flippancy with which the characters treat right at the again, I'd forgotten not only how quickly the whole it's a game disintegrates, but how flippantly or how quickly you have the first sort of bank robbery and sort of scenes of violence, because, you know. So, but the film treats that very flippantly, sort of run of the mill. So there's something quite like, hey, guns are part of the city, and people.
I mean,
people
again,
use them
I'll try and stay optimistic, but I'm sort of deliberately trying to do this now. You could argue that flippancy is a part of the ridicule. So actually, what it's doing is ridiculing.
Yeah, and kind of normalising guns and.
This isn't the beginning of The Dark Knight, is it? Where that kind of that gun back, you know, like, which I watched quite recently again. Like, you know, that kind of look at, you know, it's sort of, hey, these are all grim jokes, but look how cool they are. Like, that's sort of what the Dark Knight doing. This is really silly.
But also, like,
there's something valuable.
Yeah, I mean,
that,
and it's there in the costume differences between the non-player characters in the bank and the kind of absurd costumes the bank robbers turn up in.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's that moment of reaching across when Guy says to I forget what her character name is. It's a generic character name. The blonde woman. You could have something better than this.
And the one that keeps like appearing with every gangster.
And then, you know, she writes a feminist critique, and every time we see her with the barista, she's getting closer to the barista. So in the end, they're hugging. You know, she's given up men completely for something better than this. So there, you know, there is that kind of, and I think that's where it's smart as well as clever. It does things like that. And that there is something really bizarrely moving about that in a film that's so flippant.
I just think when you said about kind of a metaphor of America, I was thinking about the guns. I was thinking about the kind of normalisation of. Well, he just has to go about his business with the threat of.
I guess I'm saying I don't think it's normalised. I think
it's showing how absurd it is that it's normalised.
Right. Yes, I see what you mean.
It's exactly. I'm with you. I think it's making it a parodic force, and there's something valuable to that, because often both the left response to gun violence is very thoughts and prayers. You know, like, it's very sober. There might be a value to ridiculing the nonsensical nature of it, you know, and that affective quality.
So
I don't think this film celebrates gun. I don't know. I'm trying to think about the ending.
No. I don't think
there are issues. Sorry. Yes, you go. You say words.
Well, no, because I think that the first sort of proper connection between the two characters that extends between Millie and Guy that isn't related to Mariah Carey is in the weapon. Is about weapons and about guns, and it's sort of treated in a really normalised way. But I agree with you that it's trying to ridicule the absurdity of normalisation, and how they're having these conversations as she, like, what's the word, like, I don't want to say stacks up, that she weapons up, whatever that phrase is.
Tools up.
Tools up, yeah. And that in relation, and also the bit where I think it's the second time, maybe the first time that the bank gets robbed, and they just go down and have a conversation. They're crouched on the floor, and all this like broken glass is flying into their faces, and they're trying to have these conversations, these quite earnest conversations about Ryan Reynolds' lack of kind of female accompaniment, sort of thing, while all this stuff is going on.
Yeah.
And so it uses almost his star persona to make absurd that normalisation that you said. I agree with you. It's not trying to normalise gun culture. It's talking about, isn't it just weird that this is how people live their lives, with this kind of constant threat of ambush, violence, death.
And if you think about it, you know, if we think of that scene where she freely acknowledges that the rules of the game you don't have to play it this way. No. Like I can't remember the exact dialogue because I only seen it the once, but he says something like, "Has anyone ever? Why do we always do it this way? Why can't you play it in
as a good way? A good guy in one?
Why can't you be the good guy?" And she acknowledges you could, and it doesn't occur to her that you might try that, or at least it's the first time it seems to have occurred to her that you might try that, and yet there's an interesting. He is a character supposedly of no agency in this world. It would be surely his role to just assume that the rules are what they are and you can't do anything about them. She is a character that has the power to decide what the game is, and yet he's the one saying to her, "Why can't you play it this way?" And there's something oddly, moving or affecting.
He's not being controlled.
Yes,
because he's not human. So the non-human character is saying has empathy, whereas the human controlling the avatar
the
doesn't
character
have
with all the
Yeah.
responsibility
Yeah.
is being shown up by the character who assumes responsibility for their role, even though they have no structural
Yeah.
need to.
Yeah, I mean, presumably she's gone into the game as well with a sense of who Antoine is and the kind of game
we
it
need to
is.
write
So
him,
she
yeah.
should,
Yeah.
so she's learnt his logic of the game, thinking that's the only way.
But she's also trying to break the
Wicked
game.
game. Yeah.
Like, she
Yeah.
can't think. She didn't.
Yeah.
She hadn't thought of breaking the game by not playing it by the same rules.
How
as
does she
everyone.
pay for her apartment? Just curiosity.
How does any character in any
Oh, I
game
did-
pay
I
for
know
their
exactly.
But she's
apartment?
explicitly unemployed.
No, I know.
But also apartments that look really nice but are easy to break into.
Yeah.
Because she just sits in there. I guess I would say there's stuff that we said about Ryan Reynolds I would perhaps extend to Taika Waititi in terms of a shtick. And so I wondered whether what his role in the film then as the sort of megalomaniac. He's Dr. Evil, basically.
I'm now taking off my optimistic reading hat and I'm putting it down just
because he's also part of this cameo culture. He's the sidekick in the Thor movies. He's the witty one in Lightyear. I wondered what people thought about Antoine as this Mugatu from Zoolander plus Dr. Evil from the Austin Powers movies. Whether he's what his role is as sort of a symbolic villain, if you like. But
I mean, it's a really curious performance of how tech billionaires like to think of themselves,
Yes.
or something like that. I think,
Yep.
that he's not a man in a suit is really important. That it is this kind of a performance of a hip, in touch,
like a technocratic savior guy who's going to come on, but he does so on Twitter, or he does
Silicon Valley kind of new gen.
So significantly, the view outside of his office window is Seattle, where the rest of it isn't in Seattle.
Right,
But we do have the space towery thing visible. It's filmed in Boston and a bit of Pittsburgh, I think.
Okay.
But he has the Silicon Valley tech billionaire view out of his window, almost like he's a character in a game. It's one of the quiet signifiers of that kind of personality. So his next move would probably be buying Twitter or something like that.
Yep. Yeah.
But because it's trying to do that switch from hippie to tech libertarian character, I think he pulls it off really well. And he's not as annoying as he often is.
Okay.
More roles like that, less Thor: Love and Thunder, please.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I can't. When he starts shouting, "I need more IPs," everything has
Yeah,
to. Like, I can't. It's not even his performance really. It's that character of like, hey, let's set. I can just see all those Disney executives slapping themselves on the back, going, "Oh, we've really roasted ourselves here."
Roid it up and release a catchphrase.
Yeah. Aren't we brave? It's like
Yeah.
that I can't really stand. But what did you have thoughts on?
No. I suppose there's his star persona, of course, but
he's an odd little thing.
But in a film that's very hyperbolic and very. There's obviously something deliberate, as you say. Maybe it's ill-founded. The sort of backslapping of we've roasted ourselves. We all know a boss like this guy, right?
So he even gets to use the Emperor line, doesn't he? Where he tells the guards to leave us.
Right. Okay. So he gets to see the Galactic Emperor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything we haven't talked about? And obviously, it's great for people who want to look at fictional worlds, right? Or fictional worlds that something that we often talk about, the sort of rules. But I like the idea of the way that people play the game, or the way that the rules and the conventions, and what that might say about the real world. Fictional world's always relationship to our real world, but
the official rules is right. It's the what is it? I guess the ideology. What's the nominal official function of the game? What's the if that game was on a synopsis, like I had a synopsis,
the teleology or something.
I suspect it wouldn't be you can drive around shooting people and doing bank robberies. It would be
the mission.
Get to survive in an urban land. There'll be something. So it's that gap between the kind of the stories we tell ourselves about what this society is here to do and what society is actually doing. Which I think. Has legs.
So anything else? It's obviously a fantasy, so we can just tick that off. It's a bit of animation.
We talked about play, and we talked about imagination and imagining yourself into games. I think it does play with those kind of ideas. Yeah. Mark, any more from your end that we haven't covered?
I was really curious. I've been sat here thinking about the connection to superhero narratives,
Okay.
and it's one of those tiny things in the film where talking about this kind of textured illusions and what have you. So we get a little bit of Stranger Things music, we get a little bit of Killing Eve music. We do also get a little bit of Greatest American Hero music. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember that.
That is, I'm afraid.
Early 80s TV series starring William Catt
Okay.
and Robert Culp.
Okay.
And it's a high school teacher, I think, some no-hoper kind of character played by William Catt, who discovers an alien flying suit, and he becomes the Greatest American Hero. It's a kind of slapstick comedy. God, it's shown in my TV region on a Saturday morning, but it would normally be sort of Saturday evening-ish kind of show. And, it's first of all the depth, good grief, who else would recognise that? And I was surprised that I did, because it's a long time since, I did rewatch it a few years ago. Not as good as I childishly remember. But that sense of a hapless superhero, I think, might feed into trying to process how we make sense of basically a superhero who's Clark Kent in both worlds.
Okay. Yeah, interesting.
And he takes off his glasses and he looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
I think the connection to superheroes, it is there in some way, and that idea of how you negotiate masculinity. You're talking about in the post-recession, that kind of. It ties in all kinds of horrible ways to transphobia and things like that. Is that it's not about trying and failing. It's just about being. You be male. 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 It's kind of really rigidly. And if your business fails, you go back to being male in another sense. But you constantly be male. Yeah. And I think as conflicted as I am about Ryan Reynolds, he's probably, I can't think of another actor as interesting and playing across that sense of how does masculinity work anymore. The Rock does it to an extent because of the relentless sentimentality of his roles with his physique. But that's kind of a one-note way of doing it.
Yeah.
And I just can't think of anyone else who really captures this sense of nervousness, uncertainty, querulousness about precisely what it is. Once you're told to be male, what does that actually look like? How does that work? It has to have multifacets. They have to be in tension and conflict with each other, which we see running through him. And in an era of, Uncut Gems and The Joker, who needs more toxic masculinity thrown at us as a way of representing the struggle to understand what it means to be, let's be honest, white and male.
Sure.
I think that's an unsurprising place to end that.
No, but a very important place to end. And I think I think we'll come out of the game now. So yes, Mark. Listeners have got a snapshot of the kind of critical lenses that you bring to these sort of things. You've got a collection out. You've got a book out. Tell us about them and anything else that.
So the book Anthropocene Unconscious Climate Catastrophe Culture. They insisted I have a subtitle, and I came up with all kinds of improbable ones, which I knew they wouldn't use. And then I had a fight over that one to make sure it didn't have punctuation in it.
Listeners of this podcast will
the importance of punctuation.
The importance of an Oxford comma in a subtitle with a list of 3 things. Carry
on.
No,
no, deliberately, and no and in there either. So those 3 words can be read in any way.
Okay.
It's a very deliberate decision. And that book really begins as a response to Amitav Ghosh's argument in The Great Derangement about how what he calls the serious literary novel, and throughout that I call the mundane novel, can't really address climate change. And I think his argument is, it's half the time I think it's really quite persuasive, and half the time I think it's ridiculous. Okay. So that's a book that...
sounds like Free Guy.
Yeah. That looks at a whole range of things. So it begins with the Sharknado movies, ends with the Fast and Furious franchise, but then also deals with a lot of contemporary serious literary fiction, Karl Ove Knausgaard, Lucy Davenport, all sorts in there, and some art house cinema as well, looking at how texts which don't know they're about climate change really are very obviously about climate change.
Okay.
It's I'm a one-trick pony. So I can do this and flip it.
Trick.
And the second book, the collection with Steve Shaviro, This Is Not a Science Fiction Textbook. This is a new series out from Goldsmiths in this country and MIT in the US. And they're collections aimed at people who midlife return to education. So they've got one that's just about to come out. This is not a feminism textbook, or a feminist text, feminism textbook it must be. And they approached me to do that one. And it's a collection of about 60 500-word essays. Some of them are 1,000, 2,000. Most of them are 500-word essays. History, theory of science fiction, and then contemporary issues being spoken about critically in science fiction studies, with an introductory essay to a key text about them.
Oh, wow.
And that should hopefully be out late this year.
Okay, so if listeners are sort of looking to get into this thing or return to this subject after perhaps a bit of dormancy, that's a really great way to get yourself into the rich debates that surround science fiction, of which there are many. Great, thanks, Mark.
Cool,
so
thank
much
you
for
ever so
coming on
much.
the podcast. I'm very pleased to have talked Free Guy with you. Having heard you talk about your book, I'm slightly upset we didn't talk about Sharknado, but hey, that's why we've got more podcasts.
It's great. I was road showing the stuff from the book at conferences and so on, and I'd always use the Sharknado bit. So dotted around this country and part of Europe, a lot of really, really angry academics who heard me talk about Sharknado, went out and bought the box set, and now won't talk to me.
Well, and actually, in the spirit of conferences, we're recording this at the BAFS conference, so thank you very much to BAFS and the University of Lincoln for hosting us.
And giving us a wonderful space to record.
Absolutely. So, yes, thank you, Mark, again, for helping to unpack Free Guy. I think I like it more than
I do. I definitely do.
So that's always good. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You can find us on at fantasy-animation.org, where you can read our blog and you can access our archive of podcasts. There's probably stuff related to this.
Stuff on fictional worlds, bits and bobs on video games. Thanks you for thinking.
We've done Ryan Reynolds before?
No, I don't think we have.
You do occasionally mention animation, I've heard.
We occasionally mention animation. I try not to as much as possible, but Chris squeezes it in.
Yes. There's stuff on superheroes, certainly.
And if there's anything we've mentioned today that you'd like us to unpack in slightly more detail, remember we're always looking for footnote episode suggestions, so you can email fananimresearch, FANANIM research @gmail.com. You can also use that as our social media handle across all the various social media platforms if you want to get in contact there. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Bye.